It looks like everyone who is going to join on time has joined. So, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. So this is about beyond the spending review and rebuilding financial sustainability and trust, if that's possible. So today's discussion is timely. We have had the spending review, which will provide more financial certainty than there has been. It's all relative, of course. I think we're all clear that this alone won't fix the deep-rooted financial troubles, the need for public service reform, and the trust connection challenges that many councils face. So I'm delighted to be joined by three outstanding guests. I've got Nicole Wood, who is the Chief Executive of Essex County Council, and Nicole leads one of the country's largest and most innovative authorities. I've got Owen Mapley, who's the Chief Executive of CIPFA, who are the guardians of sound public financial management. And then really pleased to have our Non-Exec Director of Mutual Ventures, Professor Donna, who of course you will know as the former Chief Executive of Wigan. In terms of housekeeping, we'll be recording this and making it available to everyone, so you don't have to take copious notes if you don't want to. You can ask questions via the Q&A function at the bottom. And if we reference any artifact, document, article, podcast, I will also endeavour to send links to those as well. So as we unpack the spending review, I'd encourage our panellists to explore not just the numbers, but also how we rebuild resilience, foster trust and lead places with the courage and creativity that is needed at the minute. And we're going to stay as positive and forward looking as we can. And also just to say, we're not having any slides, it's all chat. So let's dive in. Owen, first question is for you. Can you give us your initial thoughts on the spending review and how it impacts local government? How it impacts local government? Do councils now have the ability to plan for the future?
Thanks so much, Andrew, and delighted to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So I think to start, it's worth reflecting that before the spending review announcement, there were really well-trailed fears that it might lead to an even worse situation, that was much anticipated would have health and defence as a focus. So could there be real terms decreases to local governments as part of that unprotected group of departments? Now that didn't happen, so that's good. And there is much in there to welcome. Absolutely, we need to recognise that there's been a lot of focus on the need for longer term planning and certainty, and it does look like that's been honoured with multi-year funding, promises of simplification of funding sources and reduced levels of competitive bidding. But I will say more on that in just a moment. We've also seen important investment in quite a few areas that are important to local areas. There's tens of billions, I think an unexpectedly large sum going into focus on social and affordable housing as part of one of the government's main missions, additional support for homelessness prevention. For those in upper tier authorities, an extra £500 million, taking it to just over £1 billion that's been announced in the last year for children's social care reform, and another £500 million in the estate for children's homes, etc. There's more grant for adult care, but I couldn't really work out, so if somebody else could, please tell me exactly how much that might be. And it does appear that it's going to need to be negotiated with NHS colleagues through the Better Care Fund. And as a former custodian of my local Better Care Fund, I know how tricky some of those discussions can be. And of course, lots of local managers are really busy, both in health and local government, dealing with day-to-day pressures, facing reorganisation, etc. So that could be more complex than the wording makes it sound. Excuse me. And there are some specific grants from the Government's Transformation Fund, adults with complex needs, boosting community assets, those sorts of things. And finally, one on the good side, one thing for me, I was pleased to see the promise of a review of the Treasury's Green Book. That recognition that place-based objectives have value in and of themselves, they have worth. And so it'd be important to see that to boost potential investment from devolved funding. Sorry, excuse me. But whilst all of that is, of course, super welcome, there are large areas that are really fundamental that we're awaiting more detail. The funding model reform, we're awaiting the consultation or awaiting publication of the consultation response, we think it will be imminent, but is there going to be sufficient detail in there for areas to work out how they're going to be affected by that, positively or negatively? If there isn't sufficient detail, then of course we're waiting game again for the policy statement in November and the draft settlement, hopefully no later than late November. But that's very little time to absorb, incorporate into plans, identify additional savings if needed. And so there's a bit of a risk that that much trumpeted 3-year settlement becomes another scramble for year one and then a couple of years after it. And we all know that that year one is going to be set in February, mere weeks before local election PERDA pre-election restrictions kick in ahead of the elections. We know we've seen significant electoral shifts in recent elections. So will there be the radicalism, the bold decisions needed just for elections? I'm not sure. Obviously send transport, but particularly the statutory override for deficits. We're still waiting to see what the response is going to be. That there's a white paper coming in the autumn for a reform of the system, much needed. But in reality, unless we see that override extended, unless we see ways to manage those deficits, I think that continues a really, really challenging area for many places. And so it can be a tricky autumn for statutory officers to judge what they're going to do. Adult social care, still waiting. Of course, Baroness Casey's got a super high reputation, gets things done, but there's been lots of people with super high reputations who get things done who've written reports in the last 20 years and nothing's happened yet. And you can't help but compare and contrast with what we've seen in health, with rapid reviews, long-term plans, workforce plans, productivity plans, just not seeing that. And final thing I'd pull out, it was great in many ways to see some of the grants that I saw in there for things like community assets, libraries, youth clubs from DCMS. Who could argue against that? But to have them announced as like bespoke grants from Whitehall, when you don't have to go very far back, that was core activity for local government. And that's what we want to return to. So not just certain areas picked out, but everyone doing that as part of their core work. So that's the theme I know we'll unpack with a focus on places. So 5 minutes, you said there's 5 minutes. I think as with the budget last year, better than feared, some things to welcome, but still some very significant gaps and uncertainties.
Thank you very much, Owen. I've just got a couple of quick follow-up questions for you. And I should say, just a reminder to those in the audience, if you want to put questions, put them in the Q&A. And also, Donna, Nicole, Owen, at any time, if you want to come in, if you put your electronic hand up, I will bring you in. You mentioned some of the very specific grants there. Before we hit go on this webinar, we were chatting about the balance or the kind of conflict between the rhetoric of devolution and empowering local places, but then the very specific grants that are being proposed. What do you think about that? What's going on there? What should local councils be making of this?
I think we all need to continue making the case to say local government should be treated as key partners in the delivery of the government's missions. And so rather than the recipients of funding to do specific things, they should be funded to do the things their communities welcome. I couldn't help but notice a couple of days ago, there was an announcement of a specific chewing gum removal fund, or the extension of a chewing gum.
I was trying to get you specifically to talk about that one.
And so, like, who doesn't want chewing gum removed from the streets? But to have that handed out as a grant, come on. So, yeah, it's who's going to turn them down? But the plea has to be fund local places to build local places.
Yeah. Nicole, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I won't repeat what Owen said, but I just want to expand a couple of areas more, maybe just bring a bit of an Essex flavour.
Nicole, sorry, there's just we're getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know whether you have another device. Is that feedback coming through for Owen and Donna or just me? Yeah, there's just a little bit of feedback.
I will see. I'll try from a different device. Apologies, sir. Is it still coming through?
I will come back. It is a little bit, yeah. If you don't mind, because it's quite sharp. Okay. Owen, just while Nicole's sorting that out, just my second question for you was around the Green Book. So I'm a Green Book nerd. I was very excited to see some of those changes in the focus around place. And just to explain to people what that means, that to get you to do it, but I'll say what I think. It's about the fact that the way the Green Book could be interpreted is that it's always easier to approve a business case in a place that's already doing well and has a lot of economic activity around it. This is trying to rebalance that a bit, isn't it?
I'd completely agree with that, but I think it's also that the whole principles of it, it's always been tricky to try and balance some of the non-financial benefits of major investment. So a road scheme, how will that help unlock employment or that thing? So I'm hoping to see a completely widespread review of that Green Book. So the way that investment cases, business cases are evaluated, to ensure that there is a fair crack of the whip for all sorts of places, but also all sorts of projects. So you don't just get those hard infrastructure things, but you also get things that have sort of maybe less immediately tangible benefits, but that do help make places feel better and thrive.
Thank you very much. And Donna, I'm going to come to you, and Nicole, if you just give me a thumbs up or an indication if you think that we're good, but there's plenty of time. Donna, councils will now have a bit more certainty over what funding they have. So what would you suggest they do with this moment?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks, Andrew. And Nicole will be able to tell us what she's doing in a in a short while, I'm sure. But I wanted to start my 5 minutes with a provocation, if that's okay, Andrew. And I might be the most hated woman on this webinar, but my provocation is there is enough money in the public service system, so not just councils, but NHS, police, everyone else. It's just not in the right places. So that's my provocation for you all to think about. So I really do think that the money falls between the silos of services. So, for example, you will have seen the liberated method from Gateshead and the story of Brian, who gets passed from pillar to post, 2 million in presentations to various bits of the system. And at the end of 10 years, he's in a worse position than he was at the beginning. Similarly, in Wigan, we spent a lot of time really getting beneath the skin of how we were supporting families with children who were on the edge of social care. And we were spending between £250,000 and £500,000 a year per family on assessment and referral. So not actually directly helping the families, but assessing them repeatedly through different bits of different organisations' eligibility criteria. And we decided we were going to stop eligibility criteria. That was what started the Wigan deal, really. We realised all this money was just falling between the gaps and wasn't actually being used to support. 80% is ridiculous, isn't it, of cost on assessment. So we reversed that and spent 20% of our time on assessment and 80% on directly helping and supporting the family through key workers and case workers, a bit like the troubled families work, and really getting to know the family and supporting them in different ways. And I think the moment for courage and candour is here with the development of strategic authorities and local government reorganisation. Let's stop pretending that the current system works and all we need is more money, because we all know in our heart of hearts that that is not the case. 75% of a council's revenue budget, upper tier, is on people-based social care services, whether it's adults or children's. And we know that that system is fundamentally broken, is collapsing under the weight of its own design. I'm going to read a quick poem, if that's all right, Andrew, from a young man in South Ayrshire who Andrew and I came across. And we can talk about it from a fiscal perspective, the cost of the system, the pressures of demand that will kill us, not the lack of funding, it's the pressures of demand. And this is from a young man's perspective of being, his personal experience, his human experience of being in care. It's called Too Many Professionals. This is the human cost, but also there's the financial cost. A circle of faces all staring in, each with a question, each with a spin. They talk in words that twist and wind, all trying to fix what they think they'll find. The social worker with her careful notes, the therapist digging where no one floats, the teacher who's seen it all before, the doctor with meds that might restore. They speak of plans, of steps to take, of all the things that might break the ache. But in their eyes, I see the glaze of well-meaning words that fill their days. Too many voices, too many hands, each with their maps, their coloured plans. But no one asks, what do you feel, as they talk of charts and what they heal. I'm more than numbers, more than tests, more than a file on someone's desk. Yet here I sit, a piece to solve in a game of which I'm not involved. Where's the space for my own voice, the chance to speak, to make a choice? In this crowd of minds, I lose my way, a sea of help that seems to sway. Too many minds, too much advice, all with good hearts, but at such a price. For in their care, I lose my say, as they guide me, lead me far away. And I've been to children's social work case conferences where there are 40 professionals in the room. Many of them have never met the child that they're talking about, that they're discussing. This is the system that we need to fundamentally change and move to a relational model. And that's what we're trying to do with radical place leadership, is always start with the person, design services and support with the person at the centre, rather than start with a service, an organisation and a hierarchy, because it just doesn't work. Hugely expensive, and you see the human cost in what's happened to Martin. Neighbourhood teams, integrated local neighbourhood teams, and it's good that these are now happening with health, but these are not just about structural changes. This is about a transference of power to community organisations, to frontline staff, and enabling them and encouraging them and positively celebrating their ability to form relationships with citizens, the way that Martin could have been supported in a totally different way, much cheaper, much more effective. From control and running a tight ship, which we've heard many times, haven't we, Andrew, from chief execs, to collaboration, to empowerment, to really letting frontline teams support people in very, very different ways. So I do think the DOF is key, the Director of Finance in both the NHS and it's great that CIPFA are working with us on this, because the DOF is the enabler, the challenger, the investor in change and in transformation, is probably the only people who can see where real cost lies in this fractured system. So yeah, really welcome this opportunity to work with CIPFA on radical place leadership.
Thank you very much, Donna. And just before I bring Nicole in, Owen, just to expand on that a little bit, we've had conversations, you and I, in the past about, I mean, very recently, about how do you try and kind of make the case for those costs that fall between service silos, and, you know, it not just being about driving efficiencies in one particular service silo, but thinking about all of those assessments that Donna's talking about, all those handovers, the cost of that. That requires bringing organizations and services closer together. And, you know, there have been ideas in the past around things like total place and that kind of thing. Would this be a welcome thing for finance directors, or would it be an additional thing to worry about and sort of a complication, do you think?
So I think that there is enormous pressures on all officers of every organisation at the moment, and the important thing is that we try and get that balance of and both. That of course there are things that all organisations have to hold on to, that if they don't get the right returns in, if they don't record their books properly, or the core stuff, that we've got to hold on to that. But we've got to get beyond that, because if that's all we're doing, the focus of the organisation becomes on sustaining a status quo that, as Donna quite rightly says, it's just not working. So I think what we really need to see is sufficient bravery and common purpose from both officers, elected officials, non-exec chairs of other organisations coming together and say, we, the public servants of this place, are determined to try and do something differently. We have to respect and honour the things that we just can't change. There are rules set down for each of these organisations, but there's also a huge amount of scope and discretion to do things differently if people want them to. And if we just wait to be told to do it or just shown how to do it, it will be somebody else's vision rather than each local place's vision. So I would say I haven't got a magic bullet to make it work, but the attitude and culture and bravery of people in place to say, yeah, but what can we do in the discretion we have? I think that's the place to start.
Fantastic. Nicole, I'm going to try and bring you in again. Just to test if your mic's working there.
Is that any better?
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Oh my goodness,
right.
Who knows what happened there? Yeah, so
That's great.
If I was going to go a little bit back just to the spending review, just one aspect, and then talk a little bit about the ability to invest in, I suppose, in innovation.
Perfect.
So I won't repeat what Owen said. I think large parts of the spending review were very positive, and goodness knows how many consultation letters we've written asking for longer term stability. So it's great to be listened to. There was just a couple of things I want to focus on that perhaps don't get talked about as much. And one is the assumption that, the assumption in this model to get the 2.6% growth is 5% per annum council tax. Now, that's a lot to ask of residents. I just sort of don't want us to take that as a given. Obviously, it's just a model for government, but those choices cannot be made lightly. They're really heavy burdens on, some families for whom that's a massive proportion of their household bill. So I do sometimes react a little bit to the kind of assumption that 5% per annum is just how it is. I definitely don't think that should be the case. The second thing I wanted to kind of bring something home about the government's intent to simplify. And I can talk about Essex because they have used us as a bit of a case study. We wrote a case study for Treasury that I know they are using, but it illustrates just how complicated things are. And at Essex, we have over 200 grants, over 200. I think it was about 240 at last count, over £600 million, most of it very short term, some of it requiring even monthly submissions. So going to Donna's comment, there's a massive inefficiency in that, right? and you're somewhat put into narrow lanes about the outcomes you can achieve with that money. Whereas if it was truly devolved and you were truly empowered, you could just get much better value for that money for residents. So I don't think we should always be arguing, particularly in these economic times, that what we need is just more. What we need is to spend what we've got much better. And that kind of takes me to the two other things, and I won't labour them too long. And in that, some of the real basics around, and are you value for money? Like what isn't? How do you really focus on where the latency is really matters? And I know this will feel luxurious to those authorities who are in, more financial crisis and EFS, the exceptional financial support. But the ex-accountant in me can't just, well, I'm not an ex-accountant, you're always an accountant, aren't you? Balance sheets really matter. And the ability to retain capacity, whatever you call it, whether it's change funds, transformation funds, and not need to wait on government announcements for seed and pilot funding all the time, to be able to put that into your system, to invest in change, to prototype, to pilot. And at Essex, we're fortunate. We've always been really focused on ensuring we have some capacity to invest in that piloting. As a system, we put it, we do a lot of co-investment. And I'm happy to share a couple of links of some kind of prospectuses that have shown where we've done that community-based investment in the chat. But you've got to have what we call a portfolio spread, right? Of course, you've got to drive return and have some certainty, but you need the bandwidth to be able to experiment and some leaps of faith. Otherwise, you keep doing the same old things that you've already done.
Well, super interesting, but you've also got the additional challenge of local government reorganisation to try and wrestle with. So how are you balancing all the moving parts, running a council in a challenging budget, whilst also trying to completely reorganise it and also make the investments for the future at the same time? So can you just share a little bit about how that wonderful cocktail of activities is playing out?
So I'll keep it really simple, and of course it is really complex. So there's a lot of devil in detail in this. So some of the kind of really practical things is you really have to compartmentalise. I mean, of course, LGR and transformation are not, they're really connected.
Yeah.
But you have to keep a focus on the day job. There's a danger, isn't there? You could, and we have devolution too. We'll be moving to a combined authority next year. So there's a lot of activity. So we've really tried to segment our time very, very carefully, both at a political level and at officer level. So we give due regard to the day job and don't let go of that. But whilst being sufficiently focused on LGR, we've had to bring in capacity. And some of that is, I know it's very unpopular in some quarters, but some of the capabilities and capacity we need is through other agencies, other firms. So we've had to rely, indeed, we've had some support from CIPFA. We've had to rely on others to really help us with our due diligence and thinking. And we've done some really basic things, again, like backfilling. You can't just do all this through stretching the same officers further and further. So we had a very considered exercise looking at our leadership capacity and management capacity, and sought investment to help us bolster some of that. So we are ready to tackle all of it. Of course, you still have to have stretch. The last thing I'd say, we're not on our own. It's a system piece of work again. So some parts are led by other elements of the system. The system's very complicated in Essex. There's 15 local authorities. You can make your judgment about, is that the right way? No, we're all for unitarisation, but you're not alone. And so we've tried to pay to the different skills in the system and lean into different places.
You, Owen.
Just so echo that point about capacity, that I would agree that the argument is not for more money. No government can or should spend its way out of the current situation, let alone in this fiscal environment. It's about spending it better. But when there's so much going on at the same time, that space and thinking space and ability to take risks, some of which may not come off, that's not wasted money. I know there's a big focus in some areas on waste. That's not waste. That's unsuccessful innovation that rapidly moves on to another one. And so I do think there's more debate we need to keep having about how to protect sufficient resource for trying to do things differently. One little anecdote, I was in an event recently with I won't even name this sector, but it was outside local authorities. And there was a very senior civil servant talking about, well, we could try and do X, Y, and Z, but there's no way you could do that all at the same time. And I was thinking, funding reform, LGR, devolution, ad hoc catch-up. So we necessarily are having to grapple with huge amounts of change at the moment. So we've got to be really honest with each other and our partners and the centre about how we're going to protect and defend people to do the different, not just cope with the current.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, if I can agree and slightly disagree as well at the same time with Owen, I think you're right. And I think it is a huge challenge. And the local government reorganisation process in itself is so convoluted, isn't it? It takes ages. But I do really think, I'm really optimistic that this is a chance to reset and to really rethink our kind of core role and purpose of local government. Going back to Andrew's point at the beginning about trust, we've eroded trust quite a bit, haven't we? And, we've seen from recent election results and changes in council turnover, very dramatic changes in council, who runs councils. We've seen that's almost like a result of a breakdown of trust between citizen and state. So to get that back and really rethink our core purpose and see ourselves as partners with citizens, partners with residents. I couldn't agree with Nicole more on the council tax point. We very quickly say 5%, that's way above inflation. We should not be looking at 5% just as it's the most regressive form of taxation that people pay. It's a huge amount of money. So we should be constantly looking at different ways. But I think with the NHS coming together with local government in a more a really strategic role. Let's think about our partnership with citizens and that transference of power at the neighbourhood level and at the place level, as well as at the national level. We keep unveiling new things, don't we? A new grant for chewing gum, a new grant for neighbourhood health, a new grant for this, that, and the other. But it's not deeply embedded, that cultural shift that needs to happen to make relational working just the way we work every day. National KPIs. With the strategic authority, we need to be able to set our own KPIs and our own ways of measuring whether we're doing any good. So, thanks, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Donna. And I just want to follow up on that. I want to stick with local government reorganisation for a minute. And Nicole, it'd be good to get your thoughts on this first, and then Owen and Donna. But of course, in local government reorganisation, there are the technical bits of preparing the business case, doing the due diligence, working out the financial savings of aggregation, ensuring everything will be safe and legal. Some of the chief execs who end up as inaugural chief execs of the newly formed organisations that I've spoken to regret that the focus on public service reform and transformation that you mentioned, Nicole, gets lost in the chaos and burden of the process. And the work that we've been doing, Donna, as well, with the mutual ventures, it's been focused on that public service reform bit and actually the possibility of developing new locality models so that when you aggregate things, you don't lose connection with neighbourhoods. And it's a really good opportunity to do public service reform. But we're right at the start of the process. And I've got a bit of a worry that as the burden of everything else piles on, that focus on that kind of window of opportunity to do public service reform might be lost. And Nicole, I just wonder what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, so it absolutely is a risk, and particularly I think if you try to do too much, right, you might end up kind of not focusing and not achieving enough. So from an Essex perspective, we haven't yet submitted our business case. The system will be putting the case in September, but there will absolutely be a component of public service reform. I mean, there's sort of the obvious stuff that you don't need to wait for that would drive better value for money. Like we have 14 waste collection authorities. We have 14 different systems on housing policy. I mean, there's things that you could, with common commitment, really focus on now. We don't need to wait 3 years. I mean, I think there's a real danger for some people psychologically. They see this as a wind down and then a setup of new unitaries. Of course, there's a technical piece to be done, but residents aren't going to thank us, are they, if we're playing catch up in 2028? So I think we've got to, and I can't say what they are because we've not yet all lighted on them, but there's definitely things that we've got to focus on to drive better value. But then there's massive opportunities, isn't there? We can get ahead of the work on areas that could really radically change outcomes, such as the kind of integration of the housing, social care services. And I don't mean structural integration, I mean about how we work and how we really focus on those cohorts together, that joint working. We could do that much better before 2028. But a little bit kind of, there's a practicality I just kind of want to bring to your attention, Andrew. So how are we, like, that's great words, but how do you actually do it? Again, a couple of quite boring things, but really important. We're starting to go through the process of what are we not going to do to decide what is absolutely the mission. I want to arrive on the 1st of April 2028 and look over my shoulder and go, we've made a massive difference, not like we've just set up to, however many unitaries we end up setting up. Like, we really have to focus on outcomes to resident. And also, so there's a bit about prioritisation, and we're really going to have to stop some of the things, and declutter is the word I keep using. We're really laser focused on what matters most. And I'll go a little bit back again to the money. To be able to do this, you have to have some bandwidth, and that will be across the system. And one of the things that I would ask anyone going through LGR to exercise caution about is that they design a system that is sustainable and resilient. I know they're the government criteria, but what does resilient really mean? Does it mean resilient to just resist financial shocks? No, it means that you're able to invest in change, you're able to innovate, and that matters a huge amount over the next 3 years. So we remain absolutely committed to public service reform. Our transformation at Essex is going to be hopefully still incredibly busy on public service reform. And we should be codifying that in our business case in September.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And just before I invite Owen and Donna to comment on that kind of public service reform element of local government reorganisation, just to say I love the fact that you're talking about identifying things to stop doing. That's traditionally really difficult to do in public services, and that I really hope for you that it creates a bit of headroom to try new things as well. So that's fantastic. Donna, do you want to come in on that at all? I know neither of you have your hand up, but I'm going to pick on you anyway. Owen, go for it.
Yeah. So what an interesting question, and I don't think there is a perfect answer. And what we need is really passionate discussion in place about how to balance these very, very tricky balances, because who wouldn't agree that there is an important need to completely change how we design some of these services, to rebuild trust, to focus them more about the individual. And there's loads of examples, great examples of where that's happened successfully. And I come back to what I said earlier about just the scale and volume of things that are going on. And so it can't afford to be either end of the spectrum. It's got to be somewhere in the middle where you are like really keeping hold of these design principles almost. Like, how do we bake these design principles into the new things we're creating whilst recognising that getting to safe and legal on day one is absolutely essential, because you can't do any of that stuff if it all falls over before you get to safe and legal on day one. And so I am a sort of pragmatic optimist that we can get that balance between those who are really focused on keeping the doing well, keeping the money under control, whilst also thinking radical thoughts about how we could do this differently. I think I have seen examples where, in my view, again, my view, it's just way too into the esoteric. Well, this is the opportunity to completely rewire how Whitehall works. If only they joined up completely across Whitehall and we redesign it's just not going to happen. There isn't the capacity to do it. The political reality is that to rebuild trust, respond to some of the electoral impacts we've seen, there's got to be demonstrable delivery. So I want to see both, but I think I'll also sort of fall back on, we can't afford more local authorities to run out of roads, to fall over. It's just too damaging, both in place and to the sector as a whole. So retain the passion, the optimism. How do we build in the design principles whilst still making sure that we keep the ship sailing?
Thank you. Donna, or will I move on to the next question?
No, I'm fine. You move on, Andrew.
Okay, so as if by magic, actually, one of the questions which has come through is about community help partnerships, which is one of the questions I planned to ask. So a little bit of an intro here. So there is a proposed £100 million fund to support what are going to be called community help partnerships. So there's limited information, actually, and even ChatGPT can't tell me that much about this at the minute. So I think it is genuinely limited. But I think these are partnerships that will be expected to convene partners in a place to focus on supporting those who need help the most and critically are costing the system the most. And it looks very much like it draws on the Changing Futures programme, which Essex have been involved in very, very prominently. So our team with Donna have been arguing that this type of place neighbourhood collaboration needs the right sort of enabling environment where leaders in a place from the council, NHS, police, DWP, local third sector come together and agree to support this type of working and liberated working, really, to use the language from the Changing Futures Northumbria programme. So it would be great to get any thoughts you have more generally about, I mean, I suppose this is almost like a microcosm of potentially total place, sort of joining up of budgets, trying to get professionals, not just from within councils, but to work together with professionals from other agencies. And with the community help partnerships, it seems that they intend those to be focused on the people who need the very most help and have the most complex needs, and would fall into that trap of what Donna was describing earlier, of having to repeat their story to lots of different people and the cost of that. So I'd really welcome any thoughts. I don't think, sorry for the questioner, there's a lot more information on community help partnerships, unless anybody can tell me, but I'd love to get the thoughts of the panel just on the principles of working in that way. Owen?
So more than happy to kick off. I think that the concept of people working together across different agencies, focusing more about the needs of individuals in their places, well, absolutely. And I think there is probably loads of that sort of work going on just already that maybe isn't labelled as that or with the specific programme. And so let's ensure that in places we are encouraging the identification, the protecting, the expanding of those sorts of approaches, that it doesn't all needs to be enabled, funded, labelled by the centre. I think it also goes to the heart of, there's a lot of rhetoric about the shift left into prevention, and some of these ways are that sort of more tangible, practical ways that we can achieve some of that. And so whether that's at an individual level with sort of stabilised outcomes for specific individuals in our communities, often those with multiple disadvantage, whether it's at service level with collaboration between different services around a person-centred approach, whether it's at systems level where you try and sort of bake that into the way you do commissioning and so on. I think it needs to be driven in place, because it's going to be different in different places. I think we need to see experimentation of different styles to see what works best. But we've also got to be open to what might not work. I remember a programme that we had in my old stomping ground where we did some of these things. And when we evaluated it, we realized that we were spending even more money surrounding a few individuals with like gold-plated levels of service, and we weren't actually achieving any better outcomes. And so we had to stop that initiative and try something different. And a bit like Nicole said, a lot of this needs us to be honest about what's not working and stop it and try something different.
Nicole.
Yeah, and I think I referenced again, I put some examples into the chat, so I won't go so much into the detail.
I'll share those with people afterwards. Yeah, thank you.
Great. And we had it, like you said, we did have a very, what we're assuming is a similar programme. We had Changing Futures in Essex that was just under 3 million, focused on 180 high-risk clients. That was back in 2022, and they tended to be clients that needed a lot of therapeutic support, mental health support. Some of them were people who'd left prison, that they needed a lot of multi-agency support wrapped around them. I think what's more interesting in the initiative is that it's sustained as a way of working, because the danger is you have an initiative, you're relying on government funding, the funding runs out and the energy runs out. But that has been something that has sustained, and it was independently evaluated, so therefore people kind of also believe it. But what it perhaps led to, that's maybe force multiplier in Essex, that's probably even more important than that, is that it led to what was, I mean, we called it Levelling Up, kind of forget the name, but there was a local programme that we've had since 2022, working with partners across district, again, health, social care, police, a really multi-agency piece of work that's been focusing on more upstream on the wider determinants of health. And that's been over, that's a much bigger investment, 10 times bigger, £20 million was put in from the system to that. And it's really focused on those most deprived areas and the cohorts most in need in those most deprived areas. It's reached over 100,000 people in Essex, so we were able to scale up. And then I'd say that's level 2, and so you kind of go, so what on that? What that's now led to is what's called the Caring Communities Commission in Essex. So it's brought partners from across the system, voluntary, professional, health, social care, so on and so forth, frontline, commissioning type people too. And they've worked together since September to produce a strategic report that focuses on next phase of work, to say, well, where do we want to go now together? And that has, it kind of almost doesn't matter, it has 23 recommendations, you can read them. We've not yet got an implementation plan. It's at the moment the concept, but all of these things bring people around the table, and then you kind of, they grow, and then you build relationships, and then you can see what you can do next together. So they're kind of more important than just being a pilot that works or doesn't work right. It's the conditions for success. But the negative, I'll say, though, in all of this, I suppose there's a worry, isn't there, that we sort of think that government's just going to keep giving you seed funding for an initiative. And actually, it's about a way of working in your place and in your system. That's how you sustain it. And that's not to decry government giving seed money. If there's £100 million available for that kind of community change-based work, fantastic. But we've also got to be honest, that won't go too far. It can only be a catalyst, can't it?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to just catalyzing innovation and things in a second, but Donna, would you like to come in? No? Okay. I'll come back to that. So just sticking with that for a second then. Working in this way relies a lot on collaboration with health colleagues, and obviously other colleagues as well, but certainly health colleagues. And my fear, and you can tell me, I really hope that I'm wrong about this, but just despite positive rhetoric from ministers and senior leaders, it feels like the NHS is drifting a little, in some parts of the country, drifting a little bit back towards command and control, and some ICBs and their major providers, acute trusts, seeing neighbourhood health as simply a way of delivering the ICB's priorities. So I'd love, am I right to have this fear, I suppose, is the question I'm asking. So Nicole, do you, I'm assuming that's a fresh hand. No, it might not be. Okay, Donna, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, so sorry, my camera went And my camera went a bit funny before, so I couldn't see anyone.
These hands are going up and down everywhere. There's a glitch in the system. Anyway,
I'm
Donna,
so
go for it.
sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry. Yeah, I did want to come in on the other thing. Can I just answer a bit of that one?
Of course you can. Yeah.
So I agree entirely with what Owen and Nicole have said, and we've had too many little projects, haven't we? My background is external funding and regeneration strategy. So we used to get 25 million of single regeneration budget spent on an area, multi-agency, almost like a mini Total Place, with a 7-year programme of change for those that can remember that far back when we used to get all that money. And then when the money ran out, we just left it to its own devices, and communities completely lost trust and confidence in us because we came when the money came, we handed out checks, and then when the money ran out, we just went back to the town hall. And that this is the kind of pattern of behaviour that we need to change. We need to make a long-lasting social contract with citizens that is just there all the time. One of the best things we ever did in Wigan, and it sounds a little bit like it was a bubble, but it actually wasn't. It's still going on today. We created this community investment fund to invest in the social fabric of places. So not just building roads and setting up an initiative that's shut down when the money runs out, but an investment fund in the community and voluntary sector who would come up with some incredible ideas on prevention, on supporting people through crisis, people like Martin and Brian. And that's the area of investment that managed to see an additional 7 years of healthy life expectancy in the most deprived wards. It wasn't the way we organised ourselves or us managing to achieve efficiency targets or more money going to the NHS. It was investment in the social and economic fabric of the place. And that's what I think we're trying to do with Radical Place Leadership is think about all the good assets that you've got in that place and build on them. I really like what Nicole's bravely doing, stopping doing things. I really do think just by looking at this simple design principle of all those different interactions that Brian had, all those different interactions that the Life families had in Wigan, all the different interactions that Martin has, stop it. Stop that. Stop it. And as Mark Smith from Gateshead says, you can stop that on Monday. There is nothing stopping you doing that straight away. Because we go back to the comfort blanket of KPIs and protect particularly in children's social care, which needs a massive overhaul. And I'm glad Josh McAllister seems to be starting to do that now with some additional resources. It's just a broken system. So really adopting those principles of person-led design, not just as an initiative, but as just the default setting. And I totally agree. I know we've got some people from integrated care systems and health systems on this webinar, and that's brilliant. And it's really good that they're taking an interest in relational working, but we can't do it separately. The worst thing would be is having an NHS relational team and a cancer relational team in an area.
Yeah.
We've got to have an integrated workforce at the front line. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donna. Owen, are you coming? Do you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, so to answer your question, is there a risk that there could be hunkering down in each organisation because of the individual operational pressures they're under, operational and financial? Yes, absolutely. And I do think it's important that the cultures are retained, that yes, there's a history of command and control. There's sometimes in the past, I've experienced it directly, been inappropriate behaviours that you do see in some places, but I've also seen fantastic behaviours where people choose, no, this is how we operate around here. Again, you don't need permission to do that. You need to all recognise that we achieve more if we take our lanyards off and say we all serve the same people. I use an analogy time and time again that structures change, but to the vast majority of residents, citizens, patients, service users, call them what you will, we are all they to them. They don't care whether you come from a mental health trust or an acute hospital or from a district council or a county council or we're just them. And so it's our obligation to organise ourselves around their needs. And I don't mean hard organisations, I mean the way that we collaborate, the way that we talk, the way that we try and share data, etc. And so the pressures are on, but I think part part of the way to achieving that is walking a mile in each other's shoes. I've seen fantastic work where hospital colleagues spend time with social care colleagues, and they create integrated discharge teams where they understand the pressure they're each under and work out how to best work together. There's no point sort of pointing at each other and saying, oh, it would be so much better if you just did the way I did it. No, come together, form the right culture. And I think I am optimistic that we can avoid the risks of people hunkering down when the operational and financial pressures just continue to ramp up.
Thank you, Owen. I just want to go to one of the questions we've got here, which is about, are there frameworks or tools that can assist in trying to decide how councils prioritise services? And, you know, Nicole, when you were going through that process of deciding what not to do, and a question for Owen as well, are there recognised framework tools, that type of thing that people use? And if we can't think of them right now, we can definitely research some and send them around. Cool.
I'm happy to go first on that. So,
Please,
I mean,
yeah,
there are, I mean, there's lots of different tools, and we've used what feels like a smorgasbord of many, you know, zero-based budgeting, service reviews. We've gold. I remember we gold, silver, bronze things to get us through COVID. You know, we just had to find a quick way. It's interesting, you know, there's some of the richest discussions we've had that have enabled us to prioritise have just been allowing people to have space and use their judgment. Because sometimes the process can almost can corrupt the conversation, right? And you end up kind of really kind of analysing the process and the weighting of the process. So there definitely are tools, but I suppose I would just emphasise, I wouldn't underestimate the power of just good conversation, and very simple tools like, you know, the kind of must, should, could, would type conversations are really, really helpful. And, you know, I'm sure many of us in our organisation have many great experienced people with fantastic views. I suppose the one thing I will say, though, is you must have people that don't talk for their function, because the danger actually when you have those conversations, it can become very like they're not bringing their whole self. So really what you want is people to be able to come into the room, think a little bit like a resident, you know, and kind of think about how things work for residents and therefore what could be different. But I wouldn't understate how hard it is, right? There's a whole other level of political lenses over this. You can be as rational as you want, but yeah, politicians ultimately make the choices, right? But I maybe I'm really odd. I do think I'm odd. I find it really cathartic deprioritising. I like those conversations. I like the conversation about what you're not going to do a great deal, because the potential therefore to shift to what really matters is huge, right?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to bring Donna in, and then I'm going to ask you if you want to say anything before we wrap up.
Yeah, I also find it therapeutic deprioritising, and I always find that residents are really helpful in helping you to do that, deprioritising. A lot of the stuff that we do, you know, the passing people around the system, particularly in care, which is my kind of passion, is pointless. It doesn't add any value whatsoever. So, you know, just stop doing it. Mark Smith got rid of eligibility criteria, so did we, and we're still safe and legal. So you can do these things, and I think that's by far the biggest thing that you can stop doing across everything. So, you know, it's not just like taking a slice of a service and stopping it. It's just having that as a principle and giving frontline teams the permission to innovate and involving residents in the redesign. It's a shame we can't bring in people on a webinar, Andrew, because there is a fantastic role model person who's here today called Mike Barker from Oldham. They've just won Council of the Year, Most Improved Council in the Local Government Awards. And he is the most seamless relational designer I have ever come across of any service. The NHS and the council are just like that.
Very good.
So he's a star.
Shout out to Mike. Very good. Owen, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
But you started by saying, "Oh, can we have a focus on positivity and, you know, optimism and so on?" And of course, it is absolutely true that the operational and financial demands on all public services are really, really hard at the moment. But I also think it's important that we don't just focus on those, because some of the things we've discussed today do not cost more. In fact, they would cost less. It's about attitude, it's about engagement, it's about determination to collaborate with partners that isn't enabled or allowed. It's just demanded locally. So I think it's absolutely crucial to hold on to that, and leaders across the systems, we can all role model that and make it happen. But I also think I was really struck by something Donna said, saying it was provocative that there's enough money in the system. I think absolutely there is, because the world around us is changing so fast that it's the capacity point that may hold us back. Because technological transformation, it's not just we have to transform because we must, but because we can. If we can find safe ways to share data better, to prioritize those most at need, both it will radically transform how we do processing. And I'll give one example to bring it to life. I remember when I became, I had a parent of a child about to go to school and was applying for a school place. And my council trumpeted the fact that it was now 99% online. I was like, yeah, but it's now, it was a physical paper. Now it's just an electronic paper. That's not transformation. There's still a black market that goes on about trying to find out, well, what's the latest distance that got in last year? That's what parents actually wanted and needed.
Yeah.
But the council was very happy that it had 99%. But of course, that's just e-paper. So let's challenge ourselves to think, what does radical reimagination using modern technology and these relationships look like? Because that's the way that we're going to transform the future with the money that's already in the system.
Thank you very much. Nicole, the final word.
Oh, I'll have to make it profound. So just, I was only going to say something for a few seconds, which is, you know, I remain eternally optimistic about local government reform. I think it can be quite easy to get distracted by the technicalities of it and arguments about boundaries. But actually, it's a bit like creating a crisis, isn't it? It's a great opportunity to rethink how and why we do things, and we mustn't lose that kind of opportunity for creativity and bringing new thinkers in. So that's kind of positive end piece I want to end on. Will it be really difficult? Yes, but this is our moment to make something much better. We have to walk out with a much better legacy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right, so we're close to time. I'm going to wrap up now. I was intending to ask the panel about innovation, prototyping and testing. What I'll do is attach an article that Mark Smith and I have written on this to the email which goes out. Be great to get anybody who's registered to get their thoughts on that. But just thank you to Nicole, Owen, Donna for your time and really thoughtful comments. Clearly the funding pressures are real, but from this conversation, so too is the ambition to do things differently. So I'm really enthused and feeling very positive about it. And thank you to everybody who has joined us. And I'll send a link to the recording and the couple of things that Nicole mentioned about what Essex is doing and anything else that the panelists want to send out to you. So thank you very much to everybody and enjoy the sun if it is indeed sunny where you are.